9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4,
3, 2, 1.
I think that is fair
As
to
I say, hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a political reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio in St. Louis is
Joe Mannies.
And our very special guest today is
John Brunner.
A blast from the past, so to speak.
But possibly a bridge to the future.
Some people might be asking, where's Brunner? I have the answer. He's right here in our studio in St. Louis Public Radio.
Brunner's back.
That was a meme that was used by your opponents in 2012 that you turned into a mini viral thing to your advantage. So,
correct.
Now that I've ruined that joke completely, thank you for coming on the show today. We appreciate it. For people who have just started paying attention to Missouri politics in 2013, just want for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you did before you ran the first time, and anything else in between. And, as Joe would say, where you went to high school as well.
Well, you do the 20-second my life in a flash. I spent some time as a Marine Corps infantry officer assigned in the Mediterranean, North Atlantic. Came back.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Webster Groves.
Okay.
And went to the same grade school that my dad went to grade school.
Oh, no. I'm
Which
outnumbered.
Called Bristol.
Oh, okay.
So, and in Hickson Junior High at the time.
This is terrible. I'm now outnumbered by two Webster Groves people.
Great community.
Yes, it is.
Public spirit. Wonderful place to grow up. Couldn't be better.
Pleasantville on July 4th, I swear.
It was, and there's another story on how that whole thing started. My dad activated a small community. The kids pulled their wagons and bicycles, and it turned into be a big 4th of July celebration in Webster Groves.
Yeah,
so.
It's not one of the biggest, and all the politicians show up on election
yes,
years. It's
exactly
a riot.
right.
Okay, so did you go to Webster High, or where'd you go to high school?
No, I went to the Webster public schools, and then in 8th grade moved out to West County and went to a small school called Whitfield.
Okay.
And graduated from Whitfield, graduating class of 29. A lot of chance to volunteer for everything. And then went to a small college down in Arkansas called Harding College and got a bachelor's degree in management. Mm-hmm. From there, I joined the Marine Corps. This is the Vietnam era. Not a lot of people were heading toward that direction. When I finished my training, they were just pulling the guys off the embassy. And
so that would have been 75?
Yes, it was. Exactly right. No, let's see.
Yeah, because the embassy was.
Yes.
The pullout was in 75.
That's exactly right. I graduated from college in 74 and went through my training. And in fact, I still have a copy of the Washington Post with the two Marines that were the last two that were killed in Vietnam. But did have incredible opportunities in training and leadership from a lot of Vietnam vets who came in and was assigned to the Mediterranean, North Atlantic, East Coast, West Coast, platoon commander, company executive officer, finished up as adjutant, and I kept extending my tour. And my dad said, I need you back home with a family business. It was really struggling.
And what is your family business?
The family business is a private label personal care company called Viola and John, my grandmother and grandfather, 1908. They started it. My grandfather, $400, 8th grade education. And now it's 108 years and still going stronger than ever.
Just for full disclosure, and I mentioned this to Mr. Brunner in the elevator, somebody in my Bradley Method birthing class who actually worked at Vijon, and it was a good gateway to talk about you. So everything leads back to Missouri politics, even the beginning of life. So continue.
Well, and your father was also very active, got active in politics about 25 years ago.
Yes, very, very much so. And in fact, my earliest childhood recollection in Webster Groves is being about a 3 or 4 year old on a linoleum floor, putting stuff in envelopes. And that day, it was Tom Curtis was a congressman, and so I grew up with going door to door, campaign signs, involved in many, many campaigns for many years, and it was a part of the thing that we did in terms of volunteering our time to help good candidates. But coming into that family business was a challenge. This is in Wellston. Ferguson is a wonderful community. Unfortunately, Wellston does not have the infrastructure compared to Ferguson or some of the other communities there. It's improved since then, but to get someone to come in for an interview. They would come from University City, drive down the street, move into Wellston. The car would pause, and then they'd speed away without getting out. It was a tough area. And we wanted to know why the roof was leaking. Well, when people shoot firearms at night, the lead comes down and punches holes. It was a tough group, but we pulled it together. Incredible stories. I got very good at a forklift, loading trucks, driving trucks, pushing a broom. You did everything. I got pretty good as a mechanic. You got pretty good at everything in the survival mode. And over the years, we put this little group of people together. We solved all the ups and downs that any other family business would have. And today, it is the largest private label personal care company in the country. They ship 2 million bottles to 50,000 retailers every single day.
And just so our listeners know, one of the key products is...
It's Germix. Now, Germix was my fun project. 95% are all private labels. So if you buy Walgreens personal care products or CVS or Equate brand shampoo, mouthwash, nail polish mover. So we have our one brand is Germex, but we also do the private label hand sanitizers.
Understood.
Okay. So you do a lot of stuff for Walgreens and others. Now you have a big factory in St. Charles County, if I recall, because that's where you did your kickoff for your Senate race.
We have a big distribution center there in St. Charles County. We have 2 manufacturing locations in St. Louis. And in 2006, we combined with our largest competitor down in Smyrna, Tennessee. So we have a lot of manufacturing, a lot of distribution, and shipping, as I said, every day, a couple million bottles to retailers across the country.
So for people who have been paying attention to Missouri politics before 2013, you're probably best remembered because you ran for the U.S. Senate in 2012. And for people who are having a foggy memory or Republicans who want to completely forget that primary, it was you versus Sarah Steelman versus Todd Aiken.
And Brunner had been the favorite, even up to Election Day.
And one of the things that I think stood apart from you was actually, I think there were 2 things that stood apart. Number one, you didn't have a voting record, so mainly you were attacked for things that happened with your business and whatnot, or things you said on the stump. And you also self-financed most of your campaign, or a great deal of your campaign. But in the end, you ended up losing to Todd Aiken, I think by about, 5, 6, 7,000 votes or something like that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was an incredible time here, an incredible challenge. And yes, I wasn't a politician, the only non-politician in that particular race, to bring my business skills, my leadership skills into the U.S. Senate. And the polling data, Claire McCaskill was really finished as a senator. And her only hope was to get me out of the Missouri primary. And that's where the fun began. And as you said, Joe, we were leading in that race up till about 2 or 3 weeks. And then Claire McCaskill and Harry Reid put about $3 million into this Missouri primary race. They had that very famous ad about Todd Aiken is too conservative for Missourians.
Yeah.
A lot of busy people heard the ad and said, well, no, we need a good conservative. And then we also had possibly up to 40,000 crossover voters coming in. And the McCaskill plan was we get Brunner out, she wins. And not only did she win, but also a number of other U.S. Senate races fell apart across the country, and some people attribute that even Romney became on the defense on that after that incident.
Now, of course, Romney carried Missouri handily, but McCaskill then, there was actually between McCaskill and Romney, it was a huge swing.
About 20 points almost.
Yes, about
Huge.
20 points. And then after McCaskill, everybody down the ballot, virtually every Democrat won. The only Republican left standing statewide was Peter Kinder after this. Now, what did you learn from that whole episode? I mean, John Hancock had been one of your key aides during the campaign. I mean, you guys had been exuding confidence when I saw you at the polls that morning. I'll never forget that.
Well, it was very positive. I was concerned with the most recent polling data. John helped get the campaign started, but we brought in a lot of good people from around the country, really, to run the day-to-day campaign. The big lesson learned is watch your flank. Claire McCaskill and Harry Reid had a brilliant strategy, and their idea is that we can come in and spend a few dollars, of course, $3 million compared to a major general election is a few,
Right.
and get involved in the Republican primary, then we have a straight path to victory. And sometimes you depend upon others in the flank to come in and help and support you at the end. Well, you do the bugle call and nobody shows up. And I think at that point, no one really understood how strong that flanking attack was.
But I do have to ask this question because this is going to be a point that some of your detractors in your upcoming possible race are going to say. You spent around $8 or $9 million in this race. You had pretty high-end consultants working for you, and you still lost to the guy who self-destructed by talking about legitimate rape. So, is that going to be an albatross for you when you go into the Republican primary, that you couldn't get the job done against somebody who turned out to be such a weak candidate against Claire McCaskill?
Well, if in that context, I'd have to agree with you, but you have to realize that you have the Democratic Party, the Democratic Senatorial Committee. You had Harry Reid's PAC coming in. You had 40,000 crossover voters. Tactically, they moved in at the last 30 days on a flanking move here that we frankly weren't prepared for, because it was a straight path to victory. And so you have to understand that, yes, Claire McCaskill had with her 29 winning races, about $30 million of name ID across the state. So I had to build my name ID, which is an investment that anybody who comes in to challenge an incumbent has to get that name ID up, and then you have the battle that you have to face going forward. But, one of the best candidates you can ever have in a race is somebody that's lost a race.
Yeah, that was actually, before you
exactly.
say your next thing, we actually have a clip from Claire McCaskill talking about her only race she ever lost, which was against Matt Blunt, and what she learned from it. And I wanted to use it as kind of a segue to what you're going to do different this time around.
I completely underestimated how badly people in Missouri wanted to change teams, not just quarterbacks. And I overestimated how well I could do in the urban areas and didn't spend enough time really getting it to a granular level in terms of campaigning in outstate Missouri. So I learned a lot in that campaign. I learned more in that campaign than any of the campaigns I've run.
Now, obviously, 2 years later, she ran against Jim Talon and won. And so kind of to parlay off of that unusual person for talk to a Republican person, I want to know what you're going to do differently if you ever run for something again based on your 2012 campaign.
Well, I agree with her assessment. You have to have a fully integrated campaign. And to use a Marine Corps, a military analogy, you can have an air war coming in, but you also need the ground troops as well. And you need this synchronization of both the air, the advertising, the TV, the mailings, as well as the field troops in there going to door and hitting the precincts and hitting all the counties. And a fully integrated approach is what you need to do to win. And you never should underestimate the last minute, as we would say, the October surprises, or this would be an August surprise.
Now, one of the other aspects of that contest, though, which could play a role in this gubernatorial race in 2016, had to do with there were key constituencies that were in Aiken's corner, notably like the homeschoolers and some other very motivated conservative blocks, in many of them in rural Missouri, some of them in suburban Missouri.
And also he had Mike Huckabee endorse him, who is still very popular in southwest Missouri.
Right. So the point is, you've got these conservative blocks who, for whatever reason, didn't want Steelman. They went with Aiken. And now at the end, they probably stuck with him, but then everybody else defected. So this time, since you do have an exploratory committee looking at whether or not to run for governor in 2016, and right now there's a whole crowd of other Republicans, some to your right, some maybe philosophically in your camp. How do you distinguish yourself, and how do you appeal to these groups that, for whatever reason, decided you weren't their choice in 2012?
Well, you have to build coalitions. We all understand that. And this is a problem, unfortunately, many in the Republican Party have. They steer right before they have to go back to the center. And I ran a general election campaign. I was running all the way through. I was really running against Claire McCaskill and well suited to win that race. But unfortunately, you have an element of the far right, and particularly some of the social conservatives, who Congressman Aiken understood that he had to get that base. One of the things that I recognized that I failed to implement in the campaign is that we remember in that presidential primary is that Rick Santorum won every county in Missouri.
Yes, he did.
And that was a social conservative vote for a primary. You have the social conservatives that were really, and Peggy Noonan wrote a great article back in 2011 in the Wall Street Journal. You have three elements of the Republican Party. As Peggy Noonan said, you had the social conservatives, which are the Rick Santorum. You have the economic conservatives, which were the Romney faction. And then you had the Libertarian Constitutional
Which is
Tea
the-
Party,
the
the
Pauls.
Ron Paul group. You need all three elements here. But don't underestimate the social conservatives in a Republican primary. And you have to be able to have all three coalitions through the primary and into the general election.
So let's get into what Joe was talking about before. A few weeks ago, your campaign released the fact that you have formed an exploratory committee to run for governor. This came after former auditor Tom Schweik's suicide, which caused a much chaos and dissension into this contest. Since that time, you've actually raised about $350,000
Just in April.
in $500,000 or more donations. It's possible and likely that
You mean
you
5,000 or more?
5,000 or more. It's likely you've probably raised more than that if you got anything less than that. So I just want to ask very simply, what has gotten you interested in running for governor?
Well, quickly, a little history here. After 2012, far too many candidates peel off.
Yes.
You know, they've had enough, you know, whatever it is. My dear mother, 91 years old, would always say, you know, you get into politics to save the world and you stay in to get even. Well,
That's a good one.
it wasn't a matter of getting even. It was to stay in the fight. And in my business, I've lost accounts and I've won them back. And if you believe you have a good product, you live to get in there another day and to fight another day. So I've stayed very active in the Republican Party, continued to stay involved. And I saw this, for lack of better terms, a division in the party between Catherine Hanaway and Tom Schweik and former senators and active senators taking sides, and came into the Lincoln days thinking, what can we do to try to pull the party
Because you were
together?
telling us about this a little before the show. I want you to kind of explain your observations during that Lincoln days. And,
Yeah, because you and I stood around and talked for quite a bit during
and
Lincoln
just,
days.
just for a backdrop, the Lincoln days we're talking about is in February. It was right before Tom Schweik's death.
Yeah, 4 days, 4 or 5 days.
There was a really bitter leadership fight between John Hancock and two other people. And a lot of tension, I think, was there because there were these two announced Republican candidates, Catherine Hanaway and Tom Schweik. So with that backdrop out of the way, tell me kind of what you saw at that particular event.
Well, leading up to this period of time, I've maintained very good relationships with all the particular candidates. Unfortunately, far too politicians fail to talk to each other. And I'm always looking for what areas of agreement and how we can pull together, because the opposition seems to be unified. The Republicans have a tendency to get into these bitter fights, and I experienced one personally myself. And so I'm desperately looking to see how we can pull the party together. And going into that annual state convention, I found that things were going to continuing to get worse, not better. And I left a bit discouraged, looking for those points of unity. And unfortunately, during that convention, those ads started to run against Tom Schweik, and that ridiculed him and his personality and his background. There were issues that went on in that convention that were, I thought, very disruptive.
Although his camp, to be fair, his camp was ridiculing Hanaway as well, just not on the radio.
No, that's right. It was pretty contentious, and this was building up to a crescendo going forward here. And I look at these issues and saying, because of our late primaries, how can we have these big battles and then with less than 3 months to go get unified against a unified opposition? Mm-hmm. So it was very difficult, and I determined that I will continue to do what I can to talk to people, but it seemed like a pretty difficult situation in terms of any sense of unity and pulling people together.
And then, obviously, a few days later, Tom Schweik dies, and that seems to have caused even more dissension after that. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's true. Although the candidates or the potential candidates, and of course at this point you were a non-candidate, everything was sort of frozen in place while there was this fight over basically between former Senator Danforth and Hancock and their allies, in effect.
Yeah.
I mean, that went on for several weeks. The general consensus is that, Hanaway started campaigning about a month after Schweik's death. Once the police report came out a few weeks ago, that sort of didn't see proof of some of the major conspiracies that had been alleged, did highlight some medication he was on and some other things. That seems to have kind of tamped down any the blame game that was going on. So now there's people like yourself, Eric Greitens, the Navy SEAL / author, who have formed exploratory committees and who are looking at it. What prompted you to change your mind from when I saw you at Lincoln Days and after things sort of settled down? What prompted you to decide that, hey, maybe I should consider this?
My whole motivation is understanding without building coalitions, without building teams. The Marine Corps taught teamwork, and my small business was all about teamwork. I would say in my business we considered ourselves ordinary people working together to produce extraordinary results. Everything is working together, and every success that I've ever experienced has been in a team. And then 2 days after the state convention, Eric decides to declare. And I'm thinking, oh no, there's more pile on this chaos. And then the horrible tragedy with Tom, and then the negative words, the charges, all of the bad elements of politics will rise even at a higher level of negative discourse, back and forth. It really got to be bad. And now I'm looking at a disaster situation here. And the charges are flying back and forth, alleged, or maybe some people felt that there was some validity to these charges. And I truly felt that what we need is a positive direction. We need somebody positively to come in. We can continue to fight among ourselves, and we all go down, or we can bring some leadership back into the party and say there's an opportunity to pull together. And that was my motivation, to come in and say, let's work together.
Yeah. Now I'm reading. I have your press release up here. There's actually a bolded statement that was for emphasis that says, as a candidate, I make the following pledge. I will not personally participate, nor will I condone any person employed by my campaign to engage in a campaign of personal destruction. I challenge all candidates for governor to join with me and take the high road. I want to play an ad that you ran against both Aiken and Steelman in the 2012 cycle, and then I will ask my question.
They're career politicians, running as Republicans, but they're not reliable conservatives. Todd Aiken supported a government mandate for health care, just like Obamacare. Sarah Steelman was the only Republican to vote against ending frivolous lawsuits that hurt small business. Her reward, over $500,000 in contributions from trial lawyers. Government mandates supporting trial lawyers. Sound familiar?
Well, wow, that was a blast from the past, first of all. But, in the ad, you then kind of morphed it from Steelman and Aiken to Obama and McCaskill. And granted, that's not necessarily like the nastiest or worst ad that I've ever seen. It's not even really even
close.
And
it wasn't. There were no personal.
There were no
attacks.
personal attacks. But the point I'm trying to ask you is, you ran quite a few negative ads against both Aiken and Steelman. They were mainly on policy, but they still were negative in nature. How can Republicans kind of trust that you're going to run a positive, non-personal attack type campaign this time around?
There's a big difference between personal attacks and policy attacks. You go to a person's voting record, and if they say one thing and vote a different way, that was the challenge I had. And for the claims to be conservative, all the claims that politicians tend to bring up, especially in primaries, and yet their voting records were something quite a bit different. You say that there's not much of a difference between the voting records that these individuals had and the voting records of some of the opposition. So, yes, unlike the ad that was run against Tom Schweik that disparaged his stature, his character, squash him like a bug, these personal attacks are totally uncalled for because, when you move off of the issues and go into the personal attacks, you've lost the values and the principles that why you got into the race to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so I believe it's absolutely critical to stay on the issues. And I had some big pushbacks in fighting with my own campaign and draw the line. And I said, Every statement has to be backed up with a fact.
I just got to ask in retrospect, do you think that after all that happened, Todd Aiken and Barack Obama are the same person?
No, no, but when they both propose the same type of health care, and you have the type of voting for continue to expand the debt ceiling limits and all of that.
We don't have to relitigate it. I just think it's funny in retrospect, given what happened.
But what you have here, and that's to your point. You start to lose, especially the primary voters.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. You have an intellectual argument, but you lose the emotional arguments.
Now, in the governor's race, now there seems to be a different dynamic under play right now. Is that Mike Parson, a state senator from Southwest Missouri, just jumped in officially after several weeks of talking about it. He and another guy, Randy Asbury, who's a former state rep from Moberly. Okay, those guys are both from rural Missouri. There may be at least two other rural Missouri people, including Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder, jump in. Okay, you are among several people from the St. Louis area, you, Greitens, Hanaway. There have been some who say that really what's going on now is that there is a behind-the-scenes split in GOP ranks, that the rural Republicans really don't want somebody from St. Louis running, as their gubernatorial nominee, that they feel that they should be somebody from outstate or from more solid Republican territory, in their view. So how do you, A, define yourself from the other Republicans from the St. Louis area who are in the race, which is Greitens and Hanaway, and then now you've got potentially several from outstate Missouri. How do you define yourself as somebody that Republicans, this is a different kind of race than when you ran for the U.S. Senate. If you do run in the primary, it'll be a whole different type of targeting. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't necessarily acquiesce to letting your competition define the parameters of the race, because even in the Senate race, I had the ag community supports, endorsements, everyone from John Deere to the Soybean Association to the farmers and the ranchers. And the reason I had that endorsement is that a small family business and the family businesses in agriculture and ranching are not dissimilar in terms of the regulations and the challenges that you have to be able to survive in an environment that becomes more and more difficult in the regulatory environment, tax environments, and all that. So I related extremely well. I didn't buy a pair of cowboy boots and a hat and a pair of jeans and went
you
out
would have
there.
looked good in that, by the way.
No. But you related to the core principles that transcend geography and transcend St. Louis. And yes, they want to pigeonhole that St. Louis, but it's this was one of the biggest surprises that I've learned here, that for some reason St. Louis was some place of a bad place to be. But we got tremendous support from the rural communities and up to St. Joseph, Hannibal, up to Kansas City. The biggest surprise I had, a number of Democrats who came to me and says, "John, I've never voted for a Republican in my life, but I'm voting for you." Mm-hmm. I think freedom and some of these core principles transcend geography, and I think the opposition would love to think, because I grew up in Webster Groves, that's something bad. I know in the products that we make, nobody asked me where that shampoo come from. Or it came from St. Louis, or did it come from New Jersey, or from other state? If you have core solid principles that transcend all these other issues that are out there, secondary issues, you can build a great base of support.
I want to ask you about two of your potential opponents. One of them is Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder. Now, in this press release, I noticed that it was sent by somebody who works for David Barklage, who is a longtime ally of Peter Kinder. Is it your understanding that him and is it your understanding that Peter Kinder and David Barklage are no longer a duo, and that he's going to support you even if Peter Kinder gets into the race?
Well, let me make it clear. I have not hired anybody on my campaign, none of the consultants. And exploratory, you can learn a lot by watching, observing, and listening. Mm-hmm. And but I think your point, who's friends with who, and who's working for who.
I'll have to ask Peter Kinder that, because when I saw that, and then I heard that Kinder was interested, I was wondering, is this like 15, 20-year relationship over, and we'll have to see. But
I'm hearing that it is. I'm hearing that Barclays is with you.
yeah.
No, well, I hope everybody across the state was with John Brunner. And
I understand that.
The more friends and more voters, the better. But I'd say, let me inject about Peter. I think
Okay.
the world of him. Fantastic person. He's done a great job as a lieutenant governor, and I had the greatest respect for him. And I've met with him a number of times and occasions. And I'll tell you right now, he would make a good governor. He's been in the state. He's run statewide. He's experienced. This is not a message to Peter Kinder for governor, but I tell you, I do have great respect for Peter
So
Kinder.
if he gets in the race, it's not going to be a situation where you necessarily get out of the race.
No, this is an incredible, unusual times. We don't know. We were joking coming in the studio. We might have 29 people in the race here.
Now, I want to ask you about Eric Greitens, though, because in many respects, he's kind of running a very similar archetype to you as a non-elected person that's using his personal and professional credentials to try to, differentiate himself from somebody who's elected. We have a clip, actually, from when he was on St. Louis on the Air about his decision-making process.
No, what we're doing right now is we're approaching this the same way I've approached everything in my lifetime, with a lot of humility, recognizing that there's a lot to learn, and we're sitting down with people and we're visiting farms and businesses and schools and really putting my hands around things to understand issues that are out there, so that we can figure out how you'd actually lead in such a way that you could take responsibility for delivering real results for people.
Now, that's a mouthful right there, but if he ends up getting into the race and you two are both from St. Louis and are kind of have pretty similar, at least basic philosophical messages, is it possible that either you cancel each other out or only one of you ends up being the non-politician candidate, or is there room for two non-politician candidates in a 35-person weight primary?
Well, again, I go back to the St. Louis issue. Maybe that is important for some people. I've never looked at that, to where a person grew up or where they're from or where they went to school. But and to use Eric's words, he says he's going around the state to figure things out. He's a nice person, very personable individual, a good author, but he's never been in politics before, never been involved in helping anyone in the Republican Party, never been engaged in these issues here. He's never been in business. I've been 3 decades in manufacturing, so I have a lot of experiences that in budget, profit and losses, organizing organizations and fine-tuning organizations that I really bring. So in that situation, I think at this point in time, do you want somebody that's new, untried, untested, versus somebody who has a proven record of experience both in the military and in business and in politics and who's run statewide? A nice guy. We want more young people to come into the party. I hope we can generate a lot more young people in the Republican Party.
Now, I've heard two things in the last few days. I've heard one that that you wanted to raise at least $1 million from other sources before you announced, and two, that you don't want to rely so much on your own money this time, that you don't want to self-fund as much. Tell me what's true and not true about that, and kind of how you will approach that compared to last time when you did self-fund much of your candidacy.
Well, let's look at the big picture. It's going to take $20 million in this race. The Virginia race, the Democrats spent $40 million, the Republicans spent $20 million. Unfortunately, politics is getting to be a huge expense, and especially for challengers. So that is the big picture you got to look at here. And I also learned here it's about building teams and coalitions. And that's why this exploratory committee is so important, is to truly go across the state and say, here's an idea, here's a plan, I'm willing to pull the party together, I'm willing to bring my experiences in business as well as running statewide. Do you believe in this? And it has been absolutely amazing, the support that has come in, not just the volunteers and grassroots, people who are turning from other candidates, but the financial donations as well. And so I look at those donations as a validation in terms that this effort is gaining steam.
My last question for you, what's your timeline before you move from exploratory to actually in the race?
Well, when we have 20 candidates, or 21, it'll time to jump in.
That joke is never going to get old at this
No,
point.
it's not. I know our Attorney General is just having a great time watching what's going on in the Republican Party. I'm hoping to build the unity and pull people together in a coalition. I know all the other individuals that are in this race or planning to get into the race. They're nice people, but at the end of the day, we have to win the election. Having a big primary and being crippled and unable to go forward financially or in coalitions is not going to win. My focus is to present the winning solution, and I believe that you're going to see more people turn to me and support me in terms of numbers, grassroots, and dollars.
And just asking again, any particular date we should be on the lookout for?
I'd love to put a date. Maybe President Obama puts dates in terms of troop withdrawals or attacks and all those particular issues. The ground game and politics change daily. You don't know what's going to happen there. Right now, all I can say, I just got back from Springfield last night. Incredible support. We had over 30 folks for dinner, and everywhere I go, I get great support and encouragement. So I'm cautiously optimistic and continue to charge ahead.
Very good. And if you do decide to get in, we'll have to have you back so we can talk policy up the yin-yang, so to speak. To close us out, you can read all of our stories at stlpublicradio.org. You can follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. You can follow Joe on Twitter
at JMannies. That's JMannies.
And I know that you have a very popular Twitter account nowadays. Where can we find you?
John Brunner Mo, or I'll put my advertisement in, johnbrunner.com. And you're ready to click and put in a donation, johnbrunner.com.
You can or can't do that. It's up to the listener, depending on their political allegiance. But very good.
Well, we welcome Democrats, Independents, Republicans, everybody to get this state back on track, to get a business guy running the state. Same what's happened in Illinois, same what's going to happen in Massachusetts, same what's happened in Michigan. We can do it here in Missouri.
Very good. Until next week, so long.